Hey, this is Jackie Hauser with Flexner Hauser Injury Law. I'm here today with two of my favorite admiralty law attorneys, Seth Buskirk and Don Evans. They help me out on many of our boating accident cases because they are experts, and I like to have experts on my side of the V if we have to file a lawsuit. And so I want them to introduce themselves, and then we're going to talk about, it's about to be boating accident season. That's terrible. I shouldn't say that. It's about to be boating season. And so we're going to talk about boating accidents and admiralty law and how that is so particular and so much different from just personal injury law, and why you need experts in your corner whenever you have a boating accident or you're injured in a boating accident. So Seth, tell us a little bit about your experience with admiralty law, how you came to practice admiralty law. And then Don, I want you to jump in after that and do the same.
Sure.
Well, I'm Seth Buskirk. I grew up here in Wilmington, North Carolina, graduated from New Hanover High, and moved away for college, then moved back home and figured out that I needed to figure out how I needed to earn a living. And I wanted to be able to stay by the coast where I could surf and stuff like that. So I decided to go to law school. And then I found a firm that practiced maritime law, and I figured, okay, I can do that at home. So started practicing maritime law. And that was back in 2007. And since then, we have a general practice law firm, but one of the focuses we have is maritime and transportation related stuff. Mm-hmm. Anything that practice encompasses things from incidents involving large ocean-going ships to small jet skis to fishing boats to other things on the intermodal side of transportation, like containerized shipping, mm-hmm. and in the land-based side of it. So it can be a pretty wide range of practice areas.
Did you study maritime law in law school?
They did not offer anything in maritime law when I was in law school.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, the most important class in law school involved for maritime practice was civil procedure.
Yeah.
Because we often file our cases in federal court, and the procedural rules are enforced a lot more vigorously than in state court.
Yeah. I think whenever I went to law school, because I was looking at maritime as well, and I think Tulane was one of the few who did that. And I think we had just got through Katrina, and Tulane really wasn't up to par at that point. So anyway.
Yeah, those guys got a head start on us.
Yeah. Yeah. Don, what about you?
Oh, thanks. Third generation lawyer. Then became a lawyer for the Navy after law school.
Oh, wow.
Did that. I did a tour and a half there, so 4 years active and 17 reserve. Did claims for the Navy, claims mm-hmm. defense at that time. Some of those are admiralty and maritime claims. Then after I got out, there was a firm here in Wilmington that offered me a job doing maritime law. So I've been doing it ever since, about 28 years.
Wow.
I know. But anyway, it's always fun to have a little area of specialization that other people know less about. It gives you some kind of competitive advantage, I hope. There are 3 or 4 guys in the state that do a lot of it, and we end up associating with a lot of firms like yours.
Yeah.
So you're very good at what you do, and we hope we can give some little advantage in what we do.
Yeah. The good thing is whenever we partner together, we have our strengths, you have your strengths, and we bring them together,
Indeed.
And usually it just works out great for the client.
Good for us, too. Yeah.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit, because, let's just assume that you met somebody in the Walmart parking lot and they said, hey, what do you do? And then what is that? So tell us a little bit about how maritime law or admiralty law is different from what I do, personal injury law and car accidents.
I'll start with that. Maybe Seth can fill in where I leave it out. Well, one is very old. From 900 BC, the Greeks had a maritime code. And I think there has to be a separate set of laws for maritime law because of the inherent mobility of vessels, mm-hmm. ships, mm-hmm. right? They can start in one country or one state and end up in yours, and which law applies. So there's a great need for uniformity. Mm-hmm. The founders of our Constitution in Article 2, Section 3 actually put it in there and said this needs to be in federal court, so there's no home cooking. I mean, you're not going to get cooked in your state court in Maryland. If you end up there, it's going to be in federal court, and this set of laws is going to apply. So I'd say that's the main reason admiralty law is a little different. Seth, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, it should add to that about being in federal court versus state court. There are certain circumstances when you can be in a state court for a maritime case, but you still have to apply federal law. And so that can be kind of confusing. And going into a state court and saying, well, you got to apply a different set of law, Your Honor, that can be oftentimes present some hurdles. Had a pile driving accident case back in about a year ago that in state court that involved one of the fundamental issues that was in that case about what law applied,
right,
and whether or not it was state or federal. And ultimately, they did correctly apply federal law, but that's sometimes
doesn't always happen.
Doesn't always happen, right?
Right.
Very cool. So how is it different whenever somebody comes to us with a boating accident? What are the initial things that we're looking for?
Well, first, as we've talked about, the laws are quite different. In state court, if a truck plows into your car and they're 99% at fault, but you're 1% at fault, at least in North Carolina, you get nothing. Because in North Carolina, we have contributory negligence. So if you contributed to the accident, then our law says you recover nothing. Zero. In admiralty law, you'd get 99% of your damages.
So they take out that 1% and they pay you their 90%, 99.
Right. A defendant can sue what would otherwise be a defendant, right?
Right.
The party possibly at fault can bring the lawsuit and drag everyone into federal court. And that happens all the time. And there's strict time limits that have to be observed. And we've seen people defaulted, the claimants, the would-be, the injured people, failed to meet the deadline and get their case thrown out. In federal court, those people have ice in their veins. The judges, they don't have, forgive me. They're doing their job perfectly. They're applying the rules. That may be harsh. How's that? Sorry, Judge.
Rules are rules and rules are harsh.
You can sue objects in admiralty. The person runs over you. It really happens all the time. Let me just add an aside here. We're a small firm in a pretty small town. I think I've had 10 broken back cases just from people bouncing around in boats. Can you imagine how often it happens?
Yeah. Yeah.
It must be every 10 minutes out there somewhere. I mean, bad injuries, exploded vertebral bodies.
Yeah.
So you can sue objects. You can sue the boat. You don't even have to sue the owner. You can sue the owner, the operator, or the boat.
Yeah, it's probably you mentioned the circumstances when the would-be defendant can file the lawsuit, and that's probably worth elaborating on a little bit. There's this statute from the 1850s and federal statute called the Limitation of Liability Act, which is a statute that says that unless the owner has privity or knowledge of negligence which caused a vessel casualty, that the owner can have his liability limited to the value of the vessel post casualty. And there's a procedural rule where that action to determine that limitation of liability, the entitlement to it, can be initiated by the vessel owner. So that process was used most famously recently, I guess, in the Deepwater Horizon oil well explosion. It also occurred after the sinking of the Titanic. And so what happens is
a certain bridge that got hit recently.
Oh, a certain bridge. They had the Dolly up in Maryland.
Yeah.
We had a big one here when the Bald Head Island ferry ran aground in the Cape Fear River back in 2013. And so, your would-be client is been injured in a boating casualty and is convalescing. And about 3 months later or something like that, they get served with papers from a federal court, where under typical circumstances in state law-based cases, the injured party would have 3 years to recover and then file a lawsuit within 3 years in a state court under their schedule when they're good and ready to be in court and where they want to be. And there's in the Federal Limitation of Liability Act can turn that whole process upside down and can be really scary for an injured party who's still licking their wounds after being in a casualty, and then they have to answer a lawsuit in federal court somewhere where they probably never have been. And we see that over and over again, and we oftentimes help people more like with practices like Jackie's, where they'll have an injured party, they've taken the case in, they're trying to figure out what's going on, what the treatment timeline is, when and if to sue and where, et cetera, but then they get served with papers and they're on somebody else's schedule.
Yeah.
That's the kind of call we often get, where they say, hey, I got these papers in the mail, what do I do with them? Because you're usually not in the business of filing papers, not answering papers.
Right.
So that's one of the big things where it gets turned upside down. And the
You
limitation
might
of
mention how
liability
to
in the case.
possibly getting out.
Right. And there's certain circumstances where one of the reasons for the Limitation of Liability Act is this thing that the court establishes called a concursus. Because the jurisdictional rules would otherwise allow a claim to be brought against a vessel owner, and wherever they are subject to jurisdiction, the vessel owner could be in a situation with one casualty facing lawsuits in multiple places. Well, this procedure under the Limitation of Liability Act allows the vessel owner to choose the form and have everything decided in one place.
No matter how many claimants there are.
Right. Well, that's just the decision that the legislature made for allowing that. But under certain circumstances, if the correct stipulations regarding the Limitation Act are filed, the plaintiff or the injured party can stay the federal case so they can pursue their remedies in state court on their own schedule. But there's some funny procedural rules for establishing that. If there's multiple claimants, they might have to agree to a pro rata distribution of a fund of money that equal to the value of the vessel. Or in other circumstances, which would not deprive the federal courts of the jurisdiction for determining limitation rights.
You got to look it up every time.
Yeah, it's a mouthful, and it's quite complicated.
Yeah,
and sometimes it's an initial fight within the fight whether or not these cases are going to initially be determined on their merits in a state court versus a federal court, and the vessel owner usually tries to prevent you from stopping the federal action in favor of the state action or the stay. Yeah. But that's oftentimes a battle in and of itself.
And I'm going to tell you, even though I can go to the federal court and I can practice in federal court, in cases that get that complicated, I just pick up the phone and say, hey, guys, don't you want to associate and come work with me on this case?
To.
Right.
So,
Well, they throw hard and aim for your head is the old saying.
Yeah, yeah.
Just to put a finer point on that. So you start out in federal court. You try to pull it back to state court.
Yeah.
And then ultimately you've got to go back to federal court the second time for determination of whether limitation applies. I mean, what a mess.
And once again, getting back to what you said originally, Don, rules are rules. And if you miss one of those deadlines,
whack.
Rules are rules. They're just harsh, So that's why you need an attorney that knows what they're doing in these situations. The most recent case that we handled, the most recent boating accident case that we handled, we had to file a lawsuit. Tried to settle it, couldn't settle it, had to finally file a lawsuit, and then poof, it settled without doing too much work after that. Do you find that in a lot, or what do you find in boating accidents? Do you typically have to file litigation?
I'm not sure we completely agree on this because it seems to me we almost always have to. But I'm sure some are settled that we never see.
Okay.
Especially for ocean-going ships, cargo ships, that sort of thing.
So I guess because I do auto work, I drive differently probably than most people do. I drive very defensively, and I do things like, dash cams and things like that. I certainly preach dash cams. And big insurance. Protect yourself. Big insurance. What would you guys do if you were going out today to go deep sea fishing?
Why the accidents are so bad on the water, and I've wondered that myself because they tend to be worse for this compared to an auto accident of the same speed. And I guess they're not designed to be hit, and cars are designed to be hit. Right? There are no airbags.
Right.
There's nothing to stop you. There's nothing to slow you down. It's just you and the console, and oftentimes it's 40 miles an hour to zero in no seconds, and nothing to stop you from flying forward.
Yeah, you're not strapped in.
You're not strapped in. There are no airbags. There's nothing.
And most adults are not wearing a life vest, so you get knocked unconscious as you're going off the boat, and then you're just in the water.
Yep. And on ships, the loads are unimaginably great. So you can be cut in half by a mooring line. You can have your leg shattered by one that just goes taut, and I mean from ankle to mid-thigh.
Yeah.
And so it's just hard to imagine, the weight of a ship transferred into, you had one.
Yeah.
Right. into a line, but it is. And the shock that goes through that can absolutely destroy a human body.
And just like whenever I talk about, with trucking cases, you've got an 18-wheeler loaded down. That vessel cannot stop on a dime. It has to have stopping distance. And the same thing whenever you're on the Cape Fear River.
And no brakes, by the way.
Yeah. And a ship's coming in to dock or a ship's going out from the Cape Fear from the docks, get out of the way. Get out of the way.
Shallow. Yeah, I mean, Seth's a surfer. He knows all about wave action.
Yeah.
I really don't. But, when you get out of the way, if you get into shallow water, then the wave that's created under the water, when it goes up onto shallow water, it stands up and it'll flip your boat.
Well, true.
That never happens, does it?
Yeah. Well,
except every day.
Yeah. But no, that's so true. So, we think about, I think about more the brown water, the boating accidents that are just going to happen because of drinking and boating, or people just not being cognizant of the other boats, the smaller boats. I had that situation of last summer, as a matter of fact, or the summer before this, I think it was as a matter of fact, where this
Which boat were you?
I was the good boat.
Okay.
I was just a little wave runner. I was a little tiny wave runner with 3 or 4 friends, and this big boat came by, and their wake just literally almost sunk my boat. It just came crashing over the side, and
There's a general rule for wave damage.
yeah, you're responsible for your wake.
yeah. So, this big boat didn't care. But fortunately, the worst problem we had was that a bunch of us got wet and our stuff got wet. So
we end up, we talked about having to identify that tug that ran down those 3 fishermen. That was very sad. But it happens all the time in the waterway. A boat comes through, great big boat, throwing a big wake, injures or damages property and just keeps on going.
Yeah.
And then it's a matter of tracking them through the bridges or trying to identify which boat it is. And it's not always successful. Sometimes we can. Sometimes there are cameras on people's docks that you can use to identify the boat. And then, they deny it, and eventually they come around and.
Because in admiralty law, with all these boats on the water here in Riceville Beach and on the beaches, there's no requirement for insurance, correct?
No.
Correct.
Okay. So you don't know if this person that hit you has insurance on their boat or not.
But if the boat still exists, you sue the boat. Some of those boats are worth quite a bit.
Okay.
Now, the funny wrinkle to that rule is that it's the value of the boat after the accident. And that's also for the Limitation Act we talked about earlier, where if they win, they can limit their liability to the value of the boat after the accident, even if it's 100 feet down. There's your value.
Okay.
And if it's a valuable boat, it's quite a bit of money.
Jackie, that brings up another practical point about, you're going to go boating. What are you thinking about? Do I have insurance or not? People do not know that. They think that their homeowner's insurance covers it. They think their auto policy covers it. They do not know. I remember my dad lives on the water here, has forever. I remember asking him, Dad, do you have policy on your boat? And he, at one point, just did not know. I'm
Wow.
And people don't know. So if you really, one thing to be taken away from this conversation is if you own a boat, figure out for certain if you have insurance coverage for it, because something can go wrong and you want to be covered for it.
And it's usually written out. If it's not written in, it's written out.
Right. And but the thing is too about it is boating insurance is cheap. Relatively,
Yes, it is.
You can insure, like a little 18-foot center console boat for $500,000 in insurance for a little over $100 a year.
Yeah.
And so if people only knew that they weren't covered, they really probably would rethink that decision, because I don't think people are making that conscious decision.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the common negligent entrustment sort of situation.
Well, I mean, you're
Daddy's got a fancy boat.
Right. We've had a lot of cases with kids, adult kids sometimes operating their fathers or mothers of the family boat.
Yeah.
The owner has, unless the boat is bareboat chartered out, the owner of the boat can be vicariously liable for the negligent operation of their boat. And then that's when this whole Limitation of Liability Act thing comes in, where they can try to limit their liability to the value of the boat, but it becomes a real mess.
Let me also, let me add to that. All right. Negligent entrustment is a common concept, right?
We have that in personal injury. Yep. Right.
Well, here we're talking about owner's liability, even if they didn't negligently entrust it.
Okay.
Just owner's liability for being owners. So that opens up a whole nother angle for recovery. Right. When someone's injured driving somebody else's boat, which really happens a lot.
Yeah. And back to the insurance plug, if you're looking at your own policy, you need to make sure your policy covers the operation of a permissive user of your boat. A lot of commercial policies do not have that coverage. It's probably more expensive, but the typical recreational policy will have that. And that's going to save you when you lend your boat out to your kid or something like that, and they run over their buddy's leg, that you're it's going to be, your policy's going to cover him.
Yeah.
And that's what you want. You know, you don't want to be facing some fight about whether or not you were liable for entrusting your boat to your kid, and whether or not, what's your kid's boating history, and you're going through this whole thing about, are you smart to let him use it? Well, if you don't have that, if he's covered and it's just talking about what happened that led to the injury. So having your boat properly insured is a very important thing that anybody can take care of really easily without any skin off their back.
What we're seeing lately, in fact, we're in an airboat case right now. You've seen those boats from Wild Kingdom. Come around the Everglades. Well, they not only don't have brakes, they're designed to slide in the water and all this. But anyway, the policy there limits coverage to only named operators, explicitly named. And who does that? It seems. So we know of 3 cases already where they hired another captain. He was licensed. He came on. They never bothered to put his name in there, denying coverage. So like anywhere, coverage is a big deal unless the value of the boat itself is enough. So again, that's like these ocean-going ships. Insurance not a problem.
Right.
It's worth $300 million. Right. We'll take the ship. But we often defend the ships. I'll just say, don't sue ships. Brown water just fine. We love ships. So there are a few other things you were asking earlier about differences between land-based and maritime law. It's often what admiralty law is called. Liens don't have to be recorded to be valid.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Okay.
If a boat's involved in a casualty, you got a lien. You've got one. It's unrecorded. It's literally called a secret lien. It follows the boat around from owner to owner to owner.
Don, you might want to clarify the kind of lien you're talking about. Yeah. Because she's in the personal injury world where there's talking about medical liens. We're talking about tort casualty.
Tort casualty liens.
Yeah. Explain what a lien is.
Okay. A right to go after a physical asset for a debt.
You've attached to that with a lien.
Right. Attachment, a whole separate subject. But anyway. So the last lien has priority over the first lien too, because the policy of keeping a vessel trading and earning money that benefits everybody is written into admiralty law. So when competing liens within the same class, the last one has priority over the earlier one. So that's a little bit unusual. It's a little bit of a narrow exception, but so there's that. But we're talking about these tort liens. Someone runs over you with their fancy boat, and then they sell the boat, to a good faith purchaser for value. Doesn't matter. The lien follows that boat around from owner to owner to owner till you decide you want to go after it and you can find it and sell it.
And it doesn't work like that with a Cadillac.
Does not work like that with the Cadillac.
It does not. But then again, I don't want to recover the Cadillac.
But sometimes that's all you got,
That's just one of the big differences between if it happens on the water versus if it happens on land. So very cool.
No jury. It's written into the law. Most cases, there is always an exception. Generally, in these federal court cases, you don't get a jury. And neither side gets a jury, even if they want one. So that's different. You're looking at the federal judge who is frowning. I'm kidding. There's no actual statute of limitations.
Well, there are in certain claims.
There's always an exception. There's always an exception. But it just follows what's called latches. And it has to be that way because of the inherent mobility of vessels. The Sea Shepherd, remember Pierce Brosnan and William Shatner's nature lover boat that came in here, ordered a bunch of work, left that night, been gone for 10 years. If there's no practical way to get at that boat for the person owed money here, there's a fair chance that when the boat comes back 10 years later, they can still sue the boat because, latches practically prevented pursuit of the claim. So
you might want to add, though, that there is a federal personal injury statute of limitations.
There's a federal personal injury statute. Yeah, that's important in this conversation.
For Jackie,
this conversation, yes, that is
latches,
important. Yeah, that's because there's a statute on it. There's actually a duty to assist, unlike in
personal injury.
Yeah, you see somebody sinking, you've got a legal duty to assist. So we could spend 3 hours talking about all the differences between land and water-based law, but we hope we know some of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
and can help when these cases come up. We love working with you and appreciate your expertise, especially in the area of medical liens and putting together the damages picture in cases. That's something we.
And back to brown water, one more difference is supposedly the people out here driving on this road are licensed. The law says they must be licensed. There is no licensing in boating as far as being able to captain. If I'm behind the wheel of a boat, I'm just behind the wheel of a boat for
Pleasure.
Like, yeah, my little wave runner, just get out there and zippity-doo-dah around with either zero training or whatever training I'd choose to get. But, that's scary to me. And it was very frightening to me whenever I first got on the water and I was like, that dude's driving like an idiot. Well, he probably has 0 hours of training and he has more money than he has training. So,
alcohol, not a factor.
Alcohol, not a factor. No. It can be very scary on the water, especially whenever, you're the little boat and bigger boats are acting very recklessly. It's just, especially the intercoastal, so many near misses that I've witnessed, and just dangerous things that I've seen boaters do. And I think it's because lack of training, because they're not required to be licensed.
I'll add this to that point. There are rules of the road.
Yes.
That everyone's bound by. There are the inland rules, which are the brown water rules we're talking about.
Yep.
Nobody follows them. If you're overtaking another boat, there's certain horn signals that are required. I think I've heard it twice in my life.
Right.
I mean, I observe them sometimes and people look at me like I'm crazy.
Right.
There are certain overtaking patterns and rights of way. And I'm saying that because these suddenly become what the case is about.
Yeah. But just like Seth said, you're responsible for your wake. I bet you if you ask 90% of people who had a boat in the marina, they don't know that.
We're always, we're talking about Inland Rule 5. They're like, what are you talking about?
Right,
well,
right.
It applies to you, buddy.
Right.
So that's an advantage, I think, is because there's a huge body of law and they not only don't apply it, they don't even know about it.
Exactly. Yeah, they've just bought a boat and got behind the wheel.
Woohoo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're leaving it fun.
Yeah, we're pulling out at 10. So, gas up the boat. We're leaving at 10.
Right.
Guys, this has been so good. I appreciate it. Thank you for coming
thanks
in
for having us, Jay.
on a work day. Even I appreciate that.
We appreciate you very much.
And I appreciate working with you. I'm telling you, it's been. I've enjoyed working with you. I look forward to working with you again in the future.
My pleasure.
And I like that we are able to help people collectively, and we've done a good job of doing that.
Absolutely.
So that's all we
far,
have
so
for
good.
today. We could talk forever about boating, but we're going to cut this short here, maybe come back later on for something else, another session on a more specific area of boating, maybe just blue water, maybe just brown water, we'll see. But for now, thank you for tuning in to Laughter in the Law, where we talk about the law with a lighthearted twist.